The Alan Bowman Show is officially over in Stillwater, Oklahoma. Not QB1, QB2, or QB3, yet somehow, magically, and sadly, that's not even the biggest story of the day.
You are Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma State Cowboys, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, y'all, and hello, all. Welcome back to Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily stop for all things Cowboy and Cowgirl related. My name is Cody Stovall. I want to thank you kindly for stopping by to make this your first listen. We're available on all of your podcasting platforms, visually as well on YouTube. Find me personally on the X at Aldeo State. Today, we're partially brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment matter more, especially right now when you can place a $5 bet that'll get you started with $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Meanwhile, we should be getting started in the conversation revolving the quarterback room with Garret Rangel taking the QB1 reps, Milwaukee Smith taking QB2 reps, and not Alan Bowman taking QB3 reps. But that's not the most pertinent information at the moment. The most pertinent information right now is the fact that we have fired somebody, and we have already replaced him with somebody. Now, unfortunately, I don't think that resolves a lot of the issues, but Charlie Dickey is the official sacrificial lamb. I don't necessarily know that I agree with it, but we had to do something. We had to switch it up, change it up. And speaking of switching things up, Jason McIndoe will likely scoot over from tight ends coach to offensive line coach. That makes a lot of sense. The dude played O-line, coached O-line at Montana for like 13-ish years before we asked him to come to Oklahoma State, take all of your offensive line knowledge, and magically start producing tight ends. So I don't know why we thought it would work other than the fact that we were doing the cowboy back thing. So there was going to be a decent amount of blocking involved. But other than that, it did make sense. This is the first time Jason McIndoe is going to be on staff, and it actually makes a whole lot of sense. Now, when it comes to the tight ends, I don't know that we're going to want a slot receiver coaching tight ends, but we do have an offensive analyst, David Glidden, that is capable of helping those guys, not only with their hands, but their technique, their route running. And, of course, naturally, he knows enough about the game of football, plus all of the years that he was able to study under Jason McIndoe, that some of that should be somewhat seamless. But this ends with the crescendo of Kasey Dunn is keeping his mother trucking job. Why? How? How does this happen? Like, I appreciate the Charlie Dickey move. If somebody had to go, something had to happen, right? We had to at least show for public appearances purposes that we are doing something. So I appreciate the move. But what if Kasey Dunn was the whole problem for Charlie Dickey the whole time? I mean, heck, maybe Kasey Dunn was the issue for Jason McIndoe getting everything he could have out of the tight ends. So I get it. We needed it. It makes sense. Charlie Dickey's O-line has been horrendous. But what are we doing with Kasey Dunn? Like, if we're willing to do what we've never done before, which is a midseason fire, okay, cool, check. Again, we had to do something for appearances purposes. But keeping Kasey Dunn? It's just absolutely madness to me. How is Kasey Dunn going to magically change up the offense enough to make it productive? Well, not that I'm a savant by any stretch of the imagination, nor should Kasey Dunn listen to what I have to say. But if we have a mobile quarterback in Garret Rangel, and we have a even more mobile quarterback in Milwaukee Smith, and Garrett Wilson can definitely do some running, maybe we take this RPO thing that Alan Bowman's been doing, which is very perplexing because, yes, it's a run-pass option, so you can hand it off, you can throw it, but there's a third option in RPO, and that's the quarterback to keep it. And if the quarterback is a threat to keep it in an RPO situation, he's going to freeze some defensive ends and some linebackers. Somebody out here tell me who in God's purple earth was Alan Bowman going to freeze as a defensive end or a linebacker running the RPO? But we do run the RPO. And now we have mobile quarterbacks to run the RPO. So why would we not kind of go back to some of the old zone blocking scheme and at least create some sort of movement? I know cutback lanes were never necessarily the forte for Ollie Gordon, but this isn't working for Ollie Gordon either. And if we are going to do a mix-up with the offensive line, And we know that Kasey Dunn is very familiar with the zone blocking scheme because we did it for, about a decade. To me, that's the only thing that makes a whole lot of sense here. If Kasey Dunn is going to stay on staff, then Kasey Dunn likely should probably reach back into the past and go with some of the things that allowed him to utilize Spencer Sanders a little bit better. I know a lot of us probably feel a lot different about the Spencer Sanders situation now because the 2022 locker room division has started this year as well. I do firmly believe that the guys believe that the move to Garret Rangel is the right call. It maybe should have happened a lot sooner in the season. But with that means that you should see a little bit of a different product on the field when we do play BYU. Are we going to win? Likely not. Is it going to look drastically different than the last 3 games? I believe so. Because if you go back and look at the tail end of West Virginia, the excitement for Garret Rangel was there. We've talked about that already. But when I say that maybe they'll block an extra couple seconds longer for Garret, or they'll run the route a couple extra steps harder for Garret, go back and look at the highlights of the game. There's not a lot of highlights for us against West Virginia, but there does seem to be a visible physical difference on what the players offensively are willing to do for Garret Rangel as opposed to what they were willing to do for Alan Bowman. Could it perhaps be that Alan Bowman should have never been the dude? I don't know. I think you can make that argument. And if you do make that argument, let's say Garret Rangel goes out there and does the daggone thing against BYU. That should mean more questions for Mike Gundy, because that means either Mike Gundy or Kasey Dunn was the one that made the decision to stick with Bowman, because clearly one of them was ready to make the move after the Utah game. So there's obviously some disgruntlement that has been going on between Gundy and Dunn, which is another reason why it is very perplexing that we're keeping him but getting rid of Dickey. I don't mind shifting McIndoe, and I don't mind having one of the other analysts that used to play wide receiver potentially take over some of the tight ends. But keeping Dunn with this offense, it seems crazy to me. There has been a lot of political who's going to play because they're a senior nonsense going on. I don't know that it starts, stops, and ends with Alan Bowman. But again, if you saw what true freshman David Kabongo was able to do in the game, and you asked yourself, well, hold on now, how do we have a barely 18-year-old kid come in and be more productive than all of our seniors? Again, it matters more. It means more. The snaps, the scholarships, the milliseconds on the field. And if there is some of the political who's going to play because they're a senior instead of who's going to play because they're better stuff going on offensively, then it only makes sense that some of it's been going on the defensive side of the ball as well. So perhaps it hasn't necessarily been, a scheme. Okay, we can't lie. Nardo's schemes have been pretty terrible, so we can blame it on the scheme. But even outside of the scheme, maybe Brian Nardo doesn't have all of his dudes that he knows can run his system just quite yet. You would think with all of the senior leadership and everything returning that it would always be beneficial, but evidently sometimes it can be problematic. And we do know that Mike Gundy does have a massive propensity for always going with the upperclassmen, even if the talent has a discrepancy into it. We're going to see against BYU. I'm afraid of the news of Kasey Dunn continuing to run the offense, but at least Kasey Dunn and Charlie Dickey are not out on the road recruiting. Instead, you're going to have Zach Allen take the place of Charlie Dickey, which does make sense. He's an offensive analyst in that department when it comes to a talent evaluation. So that does make sense. Hopefully, Zach Allen's just really good at his job. And then we have Josh Gonzalez taking over some of the duties on the recruiting trail for Kasey Dunn. I honestly don't know a lot about Coach Gonzo. I can say that the young dudes and the recruits absolutely love Coach Gonzo. So this seems to be a beneficial move out on the recruiting trail as well. We're going to talk a little bit more about the recruiting trail in segment 3. But what should have been segment 1 was the Alan Bowman situation. And what does that mean exactly? And what does it mean for Zane Flores? And what does it mean for you to capitalize your money-making season right now? If you're rocking with FanDuel, then you're rocking with the best. It is monetary value seasons, and I know I feel terrible because I've been the proponent of hammering the over. We're not getting to do a lot of hammering of the over this season. I do apologize, but it's okay. We've got some NFL dudes that continue to make some moves. So go make some money with the NFL guys that used to rock the orange and black, because it's a big return for you on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. When you get the next tingling sensation, right? That feeling in your loins that something big is about to happen and somebody's about to break one for a touchdown, you can now check out the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more from the same exact page where you place your bets from. You can get started today with $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Make sure that you get with FanDuel.com today to get started with that $200 back in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Go to FanDuel.com today and make us the money, honey. From FanDuel to Zane Flores. And guys, the injury is not all that minor, right? Likely just going to have a minor scoping style of procedure. So there's nothing to get up in arms about. But what people might be up in arms about is the transfer portal. Because clearly when you have a season like this and you do have some disagreements inside the locker room and you do have some players that kind of lean one way or the other, it can cause a little bit of an exodus. I'm not saying a mass exodus, because I do think that we're doing some things right now. Maybe it's a Band-Aid, but it's a Band-Aid nonetheless to at least prevent some of the exodus, because the guys want to see what this looks like, how this turns out, and if this works or not. But as it pertains to Zane Flores and the injury, I'm hearing from a lot of people that I feel very confident in that Zane ain't going nowhere. That Zane has a new house coming, and he has a couple new roommates coming, and he's a happy camper. And I do think that even Zane can see the writing on the wall. Athletically, he is much like Zach Robinson. He's a bigger version of Zach Robinson with a stronger arm than Zach Robinson. But Garret Rangel, he hasn't, I don't think, got a fair shot quite yet. I think Zane will get a fair shot whenever his time comes. In the meantime, why is Alan Bowman not QB1 or QB2 or QB3? Well, I've spent most of this day trying to track down this answer, and I'm still not getting the entirety of the picture. But here's basically what it boils down to for Alan Bowman. Either A, quit the team, like straight up, I'm going to take my ball and go home. B, he was asked to perform a different role. Or C, he's hurt. Now, he didn't get hurt against West Virginia. So unless he got hurt walking to the locker room, I highly doubt that it's that one. So that leaves us with options A and B. He willingly took his ball, went home, quit the team, or they just asked him to perform a little bit of a different role. And the reason that I might be leaning towards the latter is I think that from an intellectual standpoint, Alan Bowman does have a lot of capabilities. The cerebral side of the game for him, I don't think has been the issue. To me, it's been the physical part. The dude's played for multiple different systems, multiple different coaches, and a couple different conferences. He's also got to prepare against teams from almost every conference in the country. So when it comes to a preparation standpoint, the amount of hours in the film room and how to diagnose stuff, there's probably not a whole lot of people on the roster better than Alan Bowman to do all that stuff. Now, am I certain that Alan Bowman would like to take this and transition it right into a GA-style coaching role? That I don't know, nor have I been able to acquire that information. What I do know is there's a depth chart of 3 quarterbacks that do not consist of Alan Bowman. I don't know if that means he's just gone or if he's helping. I think both of which could be a possibility. I would have a difficult time wrapping my head around if he did, in fact, quit. Because, I mean, you were a senior leader, and just because things didn't go well, I don't know that means, you take your ball and go home. But it could have been that. And it could have been that without it being negative as well, right? It could have been somewhat respectful if that's the case. It could have been just a casual conversation of, hey, we're going to transition to Garret now. We would like you to, help Garret. And he might have said, hey, I'll help Garret, but if we're going to move on, let's just go ahead and move on with all of the quarterbacks. To me, that makes a decent amount of sense. which is why it also makes sense for him to segue that conversation right into, but if I'm going to be helping, why not give me a clipboard? Why not give me a headset? Why not let me help in multiple capacities as well? So I haven't got confirmation on why he's not one of the three quarterbacks on the depth chart, nor why he ain't out there firing the pigskin. The process of elimination either means he's hurt, he quit, or he's just performing a different role. If he's hurt or he quit, I don't know that he still would be completely off of the depth chart. I don't know. It's perplexing. But what this does mean is Alan Bowman's time as the Cowboy quarterback is done. Zane Flores, if he has to have a little bit of a scope procedure and he gets rocking and rolling in the summer. Guys, I know Zane has stuff planned in Stillwater over the summer that is likely pertinent to some of like the potential NIL style stuff. So I don't see Zane Flores going anywhere. Plus, all of these dudes came back for Tim Rattay. And not only is Tim Rattay seemingly safe, but let's say if at the end of the season, there's some donors that have the ability to come together and have the let's get rid of Kasey Dunn fund and also have the let's hire Kasey Dunn's replacement funds, then perhaps we should swing for the fences. This could equal an even slate, right? A clean slate for Garret Rangel and Zane Flores and Mike Smith to kind of have a battle next season. But let's be real. If Mike Gundy or Kasey Dunn, whomever, whichever, if one of those dudes thought that Garret Rangel was the answer, he'd have been playing for the last couple games, right? So let's not kid ourselves. There's somebody in the coaching staff that does not believe in Garret Rangel as the future. The whole fan base is up in arms about ready to see Zane. And I do think that if Zane was 100%, we would be seeing Zane. Although I do hope that Garret Rangel leads us to a wild, wacky, fun as all get out back end of the season with some Mike Smith sprinkled in there as well. I have a hard time believing that it's going to equal Garret Rangel coming back. I don't think no matter what he does, if we win every game for the rest of the season with Garret Rangel quarterback, I still don't think the fan base will want to see Garret Rangel next year. As wild as that sounds, like you would assume that if a quarterback, any quarterback comes in and let's say he finishes 4-1, right? 5-1, 5-0, something to that effect. It would feel somewhat logical that, of course, he's going to be the guy. I just don't think that anybody in Stillwater has ever had a lot of faith in Garret Rangel. I don't think anybody's really exuded any confidence in Garret Rangel. I don't think some of the coaches that are clearly big on the decision-making process, I don't think they believe in Garret Rangel. So no matter what Garret Rangel does against BYU, I don't think it's going to matter. Yet another reason why maybe people shouldn't be stressing about Zane. I hope that Garret does light it up. And I hope that we do win every single daggone game. And I hope it does cause a state of reflection for everybody. But I also hope that it causes questions. Because, again, for all of the smoke that Kasey Dunn deserves and Charlie Dickey and Jason McIndoe and Tim Rattay, this is the same stuff that transpired in 2022. Maybe it's not exactly the same, but it's the same style of situation, same locker room style division. And Mike Gundy has allowed this multiple times now. So you had the 2020 incidents with Chuba. Then you had the 2022 debacle with Spencer Sanders. Now you have this debacle with Alan Bowman. This has now become a trend, unfortunately. Last year, I too thought that Mike Gundy completely fixed all of this stuff. But for it to creep back in, it might be a bigger issue. And I'm not saying we should get rid of Mike Gundy, right? If anything, I would say the same thing I said last year, that if Mike Gundy is refusing to dive back in and fix this stuff, then he should be put on a 1-year deal that is based off of the next year's season's merit. But he did dive back in. We did change the offense. We did make adjustments. We did go on an epic run. We did play for a Big 12 title. We did then catapult that into a bunch of NIL deals and collectives and prove that we had capabilities to keep the Ollie Gordons and the Alan Bowmans and the offensive lines and the Colin Olivers and the Nick Martins and the Kendall Daniels. We've already proved we can do all that as a fan base, but we didn't get our money's worth. The product that Mike Gundy did roll out on the field was a problem. And the fact that we've waited until now, the bye week, after we've not only lost 3 games in a row, but we lost them pretty embarrassingly as well. We're waiting until now to make adjustments. Mike Gundy does have some culpability in this because, again, this has started to become an every other year style of trend as opposed to a one-off or a two-off. So whatever we thought that Mike Gundy fixed last year, whatever that Mike Gundy thought he fixed last year, for whatever reason, he allowed it to slip back into 2022 mode, back into 2020 mode. So that might be a limiting factor. Now, we do know that we've got Gonzo and Zach Allen out there on the recruiting trail, and let's talk a little bit about that and some of the other potential moves that we could do, good or bad. But before we do that, I got to remind you, get your tickets to watch Garret Rangel sling the pigskin in Provo with Game Time. If you haven't looked at Game Time tickets, you're looking in the wrong spot. The travel, the hotels, the rental cars, the food, it's all a hassle. So do not add to your hassle when you can download Game Time. And they have a fun new feature called Game Time Picks that takes all the fluffy stuff and just gives you the incredible deal so you don't have to sit through thousands of tickets and spend thousands of minutes doing it. Game Time Tickets has you covered. They have the best views in the seat, which are panoramic, so you know exactly what you're going to be looking at before you get there. The Game Time ticket coverage means that your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. The lowest price guarantee also means the Game Time will credit you back 110% of the difference if you find a better deal, because it likely ain't going to happen, Captain. You need to take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time today. And it's not just sports. You've got music, comedy, theater, and other great events near you. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Make sure you create that account and redeem that code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. That is Locked On College, all one word, for $20 off. Download Game Time today because you already know what time it is. It's game time. We are on the recruiting scene, and we do know that we have a couple coaches that will not be making the trip. We know that we've got a couple coaches that will be filling in for that trip. Seemingly, the coaches filling in for the trip are pretty good. So from a wide receiver perspective, I'd assume that maybe Trayson Wallace would step up and kind of take a bigger role, especially in recruiting, but that's going to be Coach Gonzo. And that seemingly is because he has a really good relationship with some of the recruits, the development guys that are coming up through the system that we're scouting to get into camps and potentially give offers. Those are the same style of dudes that Gonzo was able to pinpoint not too long back. So your guys like Tatum Deuce Bell, Royal Capel, Kobe Foreman, Matrell Lopez, all of those dudes have a familiarity with Coach Gonzo. They like Coach Gonzo. They respect Coach Gonzo. So I think that is going to end up being a good thing. Guys, I know Kasey Dunn can bring in some of the best wide receivers in the country. And I think that Trayson Wallace can develop some of the best wide receivers that we get in the country. But evidently, the young cats really like Coach Gonzo. So this is a good feeling. But whenever you're talking about, does Kasey Dunn last when the season's over? I don't think so. Right? Even if he does create some epic level offense and we do, in the season, the latter half of it undefeated. Again, this has become a trend. This is not a one-off, two-off style of situation. This has become a trend now with Kasey Dunn. So I just don't see how he makes it out of the season. I'm surprised that we're keeping him through the daggone season. I am not surprised that we're keeping Nardo through the season. I would be surprised to hear, however, that he also is likely on the chopping block at the end of the year. I think that's a mistake. His defense has been a disaster. Schematically, it has not looked very good. But he's got the dudes for the most part. And I think that we saw a sliver from David Kabongo about the kind of guys that Brian Nardo is bringing in. My fear is that if we do happen to potentially let go of Brian Nardo at the end of the year, then your Jonathan Agumidus, your Gunnar Wilsons, your Tamarick Johnsons, your Armstrong Notams, your Landon Clevelands, David Kabong, I think a lot of those guys are really attached to Nardo. I know a lot of them are really attached to Joe Bob Clements as well, right? So there's a caveat. If Nardo were to be released at the end of the year, that would likely be because we're going to give the job to Joe Bob Clements. So I do know from a linebacker perspective, we're going to be in good shape there. But I wonder, because of the relationship that I know Brian Nardo does have with the young guys and the guys on the recruiting trail, what kind of effect that would have. Now, that doesn't mean that I want to, tiptoe through I don't want to lose some guys, so let's keep a coach, because I think we just went through that with Kasey Dunn. 2021, or 2020, I think most of us, we didn't want to lose the Talon Shetrans or the BPs or the DeJohn Striblings of the world. Therefore, we were all okay with Kasey Dunn being a really bad offense coordinator because we didn't want to lose any of the wide receivers. And that has now put us in the position where we are right now. That we have NFL wide receivers all up and down the board, but they're not getting utilized. They're not getting enough shine or enough ability to change their trajectory after they leave Oklahoma State. So what's the point? I don't know. But I do know that if anybody gets another year, it's got to be Nardo. How can you get rid of a dude after 2 years when he hasn't even really got his whole class in? I would even say this. If we start playing a lot of the younger cats and they are, in fact, better, does that not lead us to even more questions? Because I'm telling you, I have a feeling that there's been a lot of the political, I'm going to play him because he's an upperclassman. I'm not going to play him because we're going to redshirt. I feel like there's been an equal amount of that going on the defensive side of the ball as the offensive side of the ball, which begs the question for me is, how much control of this defense does Brian Nardo actually have? I'm not excusing the horrendous performances, but I am saying that we are so quick to wash away the fact that the first 2 years of Jim Knowles was almost equally as bad. Are we expecting Brian Nardo to make a miraculous Jim Knowles style leap in year 3? Maybe not. But I don't think we're going to have a real indication on who Brian Nardo can be unless we start seeing the guys that Brian Nardo brought into the university. Whether that's next year or not. But that's the thing is, if we've got some young dudes that are good enough to compete right now with the senior starters, then maybe Brian Nardo's on to something. Maybe Brian Nardo's recruiting is different than what we've had. Maybe Brian Nardo needs something specifically that he's looking for that he doesn't just quite have yet on the roster. I can't believe Dunn is still here. I can't believe that he's standing on the field right now, calling plays and drawing stuff up. I can't believe it. But it is what it is. At least we're making moves that does show that we're doing something, right? We're not just sitting on our hands, hoping and praying. I feel kind of bad for Dickey, but I kind of don't. Here's why I would feel bad for Dickey, is if Dunn's been the problem the whole time, right? And we don't know. But we do know that this has become a trend. It's not just we're going to fix it pretty soon type of thing. You cannot have fracturing in the locker room every other year. Well, actually, I mean, really, we had it last year too. We just found a way to fix it. Play the young dudes. If the young guys if they're more lost than the seniors, then we probably know that, okay, Brian Nardo's in over his head. But if the young dudes look like David Kabongo, then we probably know that there's some hanky-panky going on here. There's some pushing and prodding on who should play and who should not play that has nothing to do with just talent on the field. Anywho, I reckon that's all we're going to have for this one right here. As always, you know I love you. God bless. Go Pokes. Thank you for tuning in to make this your first listen here on Locked On Oklahoma State. You could be anywhere. So happy you choose to be here. Like it if you like the daggone thing. Dislike if you don't. That's okay too. More importantly, share, comment, and subscribe. My podcast people out there, you know what to do. Hit the stars. Leave a review. Later, my taters.